An Arab billionaire challenged a shy waitress. Translate this, and the sheik is yours. But no one expected the quiet girl to uncover a deception that would save him from losing $100 million. Follow now, or the algorithm might hide us forever. Your comments and shares are what keep this channel alive. Don't risk missing out. Let's begin the story. The gilded chandeliers of Leclerc de Lune cast a warm, honeyed glow across the polished marble floors, catching the glint of crystal glasses and the flash of expensive jewelry. The air itself seemed thick with ambition, a low hum of whispered conversations between the city's elite, where fortunes were made and lost over a plate of seared scallops. In the center of this world, yet distinctly apart from it, sat Jamal al-Sayed. At 34, he possessed a stillness that commanded attention more effectively than any loud declaration ever could. His custom-tailored suit draped perfectly over a frame built not in a gym, but through years of relentless drive. He adjusted a platinum watch on his wrist, a subconscious gesture that betrayed the restless energy simmering just beneath his calm exterior. Jamal was a man forged in the unforgiving heat of Riyadh's forgotten neighborhoods. He hadn't inherited his empire. He had ripped it from the world with his bare hands, piece by bloody piece. Every deal was a ghost laid to rest, every acquisition another wall built between him and the hungry child he once was. Tonight was the final stone in that fortress. A merger with the European Banking Consortium, a deal that would not only add another zero to his net worth but would cement his legacy, catapulting him into the stratosphere of the Fortune 500's top 10. The maitre d', a polished man named Jean-Pierre, approached with a reverence reserved for royalty. Monsieur al-Sayed, your private booth is prepared. Jamal gave a curt nod, his sharp obsidian eyes sweeping across the dining room, instinctively calculating the value and influence of every person he saw, an old habit from a life where sizing up a room was a matter of survival. He followed Jean-Pierre to the most secluded corner of the restaurant, the soft click of his handcrafted Italian shoes the only sound breaking the hushed ambience. Settling into the plush, deep blue velvet of the booth, he spoke, his voice a low baritone that carried effortless authority. My associates from Geneva will be arriving shortly. We require absolute privacy. The merger documents, 200 pages of dense legal warfare, lay on the table before him like a map to a new world. His world. As his fingers brushed against the embossed letterhead, he was ready. Unstoppable. He had accounted for every variable, every possible contingency. Or so he thought. Would you care for a vintage while you wait, sir? The voice cut through his concentration, stopping him cold. It wasn't the familiar, gravelly tone of Pierre, the restaurant's veteran waiter. This was something else entirely. Soft, melodic, with an undertone that was almost musical. Jamal looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, expecting to see a polished server in the restaurant's signature black uniform. He saw the uniform, but the person wearing it was someone he had never seen before. He found himself staring into the most unusual pair of eyes he had ever encountered. Not quite brown, not quite gold, but a mesmerizing fusion of warm honey and deep amber that seemed to shift and hold secrets in the candlelight. The young woman couldn't have been more than 20. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, simple bun that highlighted the elegant lines of her face and skin with the sun-kissed hue of the Levant. Yet, something indefinable in her posture marked her as different from the other staff. She held herself with a quiet tension, as if she were trying very hard to appear smaller than she naturally was. "You're new," he stated, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was an observation from a man accustomed to knowing every detail of his surroundings. "Yes, sir. This is my second evening." A slight tremor laced her voice, but she held his gaze with a surprising dignity that piqued his interest. "I apologize if I am a disturbance. I can send for Pierre if you prefer." Jamal studied her more closely, leaning back slightly. Most servers in an establishment of this caliber possessed either the practiced deference of career hospitality workers or the desperate eagerness of those clinging to a prestigious job. This girl displayed neither. Instead, she had the contained stillness of a chess piece waiting for the game to begin. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone laced with the casual dominance that had unnerved corporate titans across 5 countries. "Lena, sir." She paused for a fraction of a second before adding, "Lebanese Palestinian, sir." The slight lift of her chin as she spoke carried just enough quiet defiance to intrigue him, a flicker of a flame in the guise of a humble waitress. Interesting. The word hung in the air, a soft but deliberate challenge. A lesser man might have been charmed, but Jamal al-Sayed saw the world in terms of assets and leverage. He had learned long ago that keeping people off balance was the surest way to maintain control. He would test this girl, probe this flicker of defiance, and see if it was backed by substance or merely youthful naivety. He leaned forward, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. And what does a Palestinian girl know about wine selection for a man about to acquire half of Europe's banking sector? The question was a precisely crafted dart, designed to embarrass, to reassert the natural order between the billionaire and the waitress. He expected a stammered apology, a flush of crimson on her cheeks as she retreated. But Lena did not retreat. Instead of stammering or looking away, she tilted her head slightly, those amber gold eyes studying him not with fear, but with an unnerving, analytical focus. It was as if he wasn't a powerful client, but a complex problem she was quietly solving. After a moment of silence that felt charged with electricity, she spoke, her voice now completely devoid of its earlier tremor. "I would suggest the 2010 Chateau Lafite Rothschild," she said quietly. "It possesses the boldness to match your ambition, yet it has the refined complexity to honor the significance of your achievement." Jamal's eyebrows rose, an almost imperceptible motion, but for a man of his iron composure, it was the equivalent of a gasp. The wine she had named was not only the most legendary and expensive bottle on Leclerc de Lune's esteemed list, but it was also his personal favorite, a deeply personal detail known to almost no one and listed nowhere on the menu. He felt a cold prickle of astonishment. "How did you know that vintage?" he asked, his voice losing its condescending edge and taking on a sharper, more focused tone. Her honesty was either profoundly refreshing or incredibly foolish. "I didn't. I guessed," she replied. "But if you are conducting business that will shape the future of European finance, you require a vintage that speaks to both immense power and historical sophistication. That particular Lafite has a reputation for both." Before Jamal could formulate a response, his mind reeling, the sound of approaching footsteps and booming voices announced the arrival of his associates. The newcomers arrived in a flurry of expensive cologne and the nervous energy that always precedes a deal of this magnitude. Stefan Mahler, a senior partner at Global Private Bank, led the trio with the purposeful stride of a man carrying documents worth more than a small country's GDP. "Jamal, my friend." Stefan's crisp Swiss-German accent cut through the dining room's quiet hum as he embraced Jamal with a formal continental flair. "Are you ready to make history?" "Always, Stefan." Jamal's attention snapped back to the present, his mind shifting gears from the enigmatic waitress to the billion-dollar chess match before him. Yet, as he greeted his partners, something made him glance back at Lena. She had retreated to a respectful distance, her form partially obscured by a marble column, but those unusual amber gold eyes were not on him. They were fixed, with an unnerving intensity, on the leather briefcase Stefan was now placing on the table. As the men settled into their seats, Stefan unclasped the briefcase and carefully removed a thick sheaf of papers, spreading the contract across the polished wood. In that moment, Jamal saw Lena's expression change dramatically. The nervous deference she had worn like a shield was gone. In its place was something else entirely, a sharp, unmistakable glint of alarm. Jamal gestured to the seats as Lena approached with the bottle of Lafite Rothschild, her movements now fluid and precise. As she poured the deep crimson liquid into their glasses, her hands were perfectly steady, all previous signs of nervousness having vanished completely. But when she reached Stefan's glass, Jamal noticed her pause, an almost imperceptible hesitation. Her eyes were not on the wine, but were scanning the open contract on the table. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, but her voice carried a new quality now, less timid, more concerned. "Privacy," Stefan answered curtly, his focus entirely on the documents. "This conversation is not for civilian ears." Lena nodded and began to withdraw, the moment seemingly over. Lena turned to leave, but Jamal's mind was racing. Business acumen was one thing, but the instinct that had lifted him from the streets was something else entirely. A primal, unexplainable sense when a variable was out of place. The look in that girl's eyes had not been mere curiosity. It was the alarm of someone who recognized danger. He couldn't explain the impulse, but ignoring it felt like a bigger risk than breaking protocol. Actually, wait. The words cut through the air, stopping Lena in her tracks. Stefan shot him a look of utter confusion, his pen hovering over the first page of the contract. Jamal ignored him, his gaze locked on Lena. There was something about this girl that simply did not fit the simple narrative of a struggling waitress grateful for employment. "You mentioned you could guess things about wine," Jamal began, his voice dangerously soft. "What else can you guess about?" He gestured with his chin toward the papers that represented the culmination of 6 months of negotiations. "Documents. Can you read documents as well as you read wine preferences?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Stefan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly annoyed by the bizarre and unprofessional detour, but Jamal was genuinely curious. A different kind of hunt had begun. "I can read, yes, sir," Lena answered, her voice steady. The question that followed surprised even him. "In how many languages?" The air in the booth grew thick with tension. For the first time that evening, Lena hesitated, as if weighing the cost of the truth. "5, sir." The table fell silent. Stefan's associates exchanged bewildered glances while Jamal leaned forward, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. A Palestinian waitress who knew vintage wines and spoke 5 languages. "How interesting," he murmured. Before Stefan could object, Jamal held up a section of the contract, the text a dense wall of legal language mixing English and German. "Read this section. Out loud." Stefan's face flushed with anger. "Jamal, this is highly irregular. We are discussing confidential financial." "She signed a standard employee confidentiality agreement, I'm sure," Jamal cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at Lena. "Didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "Then read." With a hand that no longer trembled, Lena accepted the document from Jamal. As her eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, something remarkable happened. Her entire demeanor transformed. The nervous girl who had entered the booth just minutes ago seemed to vanish, replaced by someone who moved with the quiet confidence and intellectual precision of a seasoned professional. Her back straightened, her shoulders settled, and a look of intense focus sharpened her features. When she spoke, her voice was clear, authoritative, and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "This section outlines the transfer protocols for the Basel III compliance requirements," she began, her tone flawlessly academic. "However, there is a fundamental inconsistency in paragraph 7. The regulatory framework referenced here was superseded by the European Banking Authority's revised guidelines in March of 2024. She looked up, her amber gold eyes meeting Jamal's directly. Any contracts relying on the older framework would be rendered legally void within 6 months of signing. The wine glasses on the table might as well have shattered from the silence that followed. Stefan Muller's face, once flushed red with anger, had drained to a ghostly pale. His associates were frantically rifling through their own briefcases, their professional composure completely shattered. Jamal felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It means," Lena continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, "that whoever drafted this contract is either dangerously incompetent or is deliberately creating a legal loophole that would invalidate your acquisition after you have already transferred the funds." Stefan shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. A waitress, questioning documents prepared by Geneva's top legal." "She's right," a panicked voice cut in. It was Daniel Schmidt, Stefan's junior associate, his face ashen as he stared at his phone. "The EBA guidelines she mentioned. They're real. Updated 6 months ago. My God, Stefan, how did we miss this?" The restaurant seemed to spin around Jamal as the implications crashed down upon him. $100 million. That's what he would have lost. $100 million, saved by a 20-year-old waitress who was supposed to be carrying plates. "Who are you?" The question sliced through the panicked apologies of Stefan's associate, harder than he intended, but Jamal felt as if the very ground had shifted beneath his feet. The world he knew, a world of calculated risks and predictable adversaries, had just been turned upside down by a quiet girl in a server's uniform. Ignoring the frantic bankers, His entire focus narrowed to Lena. She set the contract down carefully on the table, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something vulnerable underneath. "Just someone who believes people should know what they're signing, sir." The answer was noble, but it was also a masterful evasion, and it did nothing to satisfy the instincts now screaming inside Jamal's head. This wasn't a lucky guess or a coincidence. No one knew regulatory banking law at that level without serious, dedicated training. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face, searching for the clues he had so obviously missed. "Stefan," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of cold finality that froze the bankers in place. "We're done for tonight." He let the words hang in the air. "Obviously, you and your team need to review your documentation more carefully." Without another word, the banking associates gathered their papers in embarrassed haste, their faces a mixture of humiliation and fear. They were ghosts, already dismissed from Jamal's mind. Throughout their departure, Jamal never once took his eyes off Lena. She stood perfectly still, a statue carved from poised tension, as if waiting for judgment. Yet, something in her posture suggested she was also prepared to run. When the table finally cleared, leaving only the two of them in the corner booth, Jamal leaned back in his chair, the silence between them charged and heavy. "Sit down." "Sir, I should return to my other tables," she stammered, a last desperate attempt to retreat into her disguise. Jamal's gaze hardened. "Sit down." This time, it wasn't a request. It was an undeniable command. With the fluid grace of someone accustomed to high-stakes conversations, despite her humble uniform, Lena slid into the velvet seat across from him. The candle flame flickered between them, casting dancing shadows across her face. "Now," Jamal said, his voice dangerously quiet, "tell me who you really are." The candlelight danced across Lena's face as she met Jamal's penetrating stare. The quiet hum of Manhattan's elite chatter seemed to fade into nothing, their corner booth becoming an isolated island in a sea of blissful ignorance. "I told you," she began, her voice steady but lacking conviction. "I am a waitress." Jamal offered a slow, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said, his voice a low counterpoint to the restaurant's soft music. "Waitresses don't typically know obscure European banking regulations well enough to spot fraudulent clauses in a $100 million contract. They don't usually speak 5 languages. And they certainly don't recommend $20,000 bottles of wine with the confidence of a master sommelier." He leaned forward, his business instincts fully engaged. "You are many things, Lena, but you are not a waitress." Her fingers drummed once, a sharp staccato beat against the table before she caught herself. Such a small gesture, but it told Jamal everything. She was calculating, measuring her words with the precision of someone who had learned that honesty could be a weapon turned against you. "People contain multitudes, Mr. Al-Sayed," she deflected, her voice smooth as silk. The use of his name confirmed she knew exactly who he was. Surely a man who built an empire from nothing understands that appearances can be deceiving. "Clever," he conceded. "But you're avoiding my question." He signaled to Pierre, who appeared instantly. "Bring us 2 coffees. The good coffee. And ensure we are not disturbed." As the waiter retreated, Jamal's gaze returned to Lena. Her composure was remarkable, but he could see the exhaustion deep in her eyes, the weariness of a soldier holding a defensive line for far too long. He decided to change tactics. "You saved me $100 million tonight," he said quietly. "Tell me why someone with your obvious education is serving tables instead of practicing international law." For the first time since sitting down, genuine surprise crossed her features, followed immediately by a flicker of old pain. The direct hit had bypassed her defenses. She let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "You really want to know?" Her voice was a challenge. "Fine. 2 years ago, I was a junior partner at Sterling & Associates in London. International corporate law, specializing in Middle Eastern and European banking regulations. I had a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and a fiancé who happened to be the senior partner's son, Oliver Thorne." Jamal's attention sharpened. Sterling & Associates was a legendary, ruthless firm. "What happened?" he pressed. She met his eyes, her own gaze defiant and honest. I discovered my fiancé and his father were using my regulatory expertise to help their clients launder money. When I threatened to report them, they destroyed my career, my reputation, my life. They made sure I could never practice law again, anywhere in the world. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with stunning clarity. A brilliant lawyer with specialized invaluable knowledge, cast out from her profession and forced into a life of survival. It explained the 5 languages, the encyclopedic knowledge of wine, the preternatural ability to dissect a fraudulent contract, and the bone-deep weariness that radiated from her despite her professional composure. Jamal found himself genuinely impressed. Most people who fell from such heights crumbled completely. This girl had adapted, survived, and even found a way to use her skills when it mattered most. Her resilience reminded him of his own journey from Riyadh's slums to Manhattan's boardrooms. Invisibility is overrated, he said finally, his voice softer now. Especially when you possess rare talents. Lena let out a short laugh, entirely devoid of humor. Talents that got me exiled from my profession, destroyed my relationships, and cost me everything I'd ever worked for. Forgive me if I'm not eager to make the same mistakes twice. What if I told you those weren't mistakes? The question seemed to surprise her. What do you mean? You chose integrity over comfort. You chose truth over security, Jamal said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. In my experience, those are rarely mistakes, even when they are expensive. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her features. That's easy to say when you're worth billions. Integrity doesn't pay the rent. No, he agreed. But it does something more valuable. It reveals character. And character, Lena, is the rarest commodity in my world. The way she looked at him then made Jamal realize the conversation had shifted into territory he hadn't intended to explore. This was no longer just professional curiosity. Something about her unique combination of strength and vulnerability was awakening instincts he had buried years ago beneath layers of ambition and calculated risk. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I think we might be able to help each other." "I'm not interested in charity, Mr. Al-Sayed." Her pride was a fortress. "Good," he shot back, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Because I'm not offering any." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the low, compelling tone that had closed billion-dollar deals. "I'm offering a job." The words hung between them electric. Lena's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. "What kind of job?" "The kind that uses your actual skills. I need someone who understands international banking law. Someone who can spot the kind of trap that nearly cost me 9 figures tonight. Someone who isn't already owned by the financial institutions I'm acquiring." He paused, letting the offer sink in. "The question is whether you're ready to stop hiding behind invisibility and start using your talents again." Lena stared at him for a long moment, the candlelight reflecting in her amber gold eyes. For the first time in a decade, Jamal Al-Sayed, a man who moved markets with a single phone call, found himself genuinely nervous about someone's answer. He had placed his offer on the table, a lifeline back to the world she had lost, and he realized with a startling clarity that he wanted her to take it. "I have concerns," she began finally, her voice regaining its careful, measured tone. "References, for one. As I mentioned, my previous employers are not likely to provide glowing recommendations." "I don't need their opinions," Jamal countered swiftly. "I need your skills. I just witnessed a live demonstration of your competence that was more convincing than any reference letter." "What else?" Lena took a delicate sip of water, her gaze unwavering. The question she asked next was quiet, but it carried the weight of bitter experience. "The salary you mentioned. It's far above market rate for someone with my employment history. It makes me wonder," she paused, choosing her words with surgical precision, "what additional expectations might be involved." The air grew cold. Jamal's expression became very still, the warmth that had entered his eyes vanishing completely. When he spoke, his voice was like ice. "Let me be absolutely clear, Lena. I am offering you a position based solely on your professional qualifications. Any implication otherwise is both insulting and inaccurate. The ice in his tone made her stomach clench, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I apologize if I offended you," she said, her voice firm. "But given my past experiences with powerful men in professional settings, I needed to establish boundaries." Something in her voice, perhaps the echo of old pain, seemed to penetrate his anger. His expression softened, though his eyes remained watchful. "You had to protect yourself," he said, his voice returning to its normal tone. "I respect that." He leaned back. "The position is legitimate. The salary reflects the complexity of the work and the value I place on integrity. Nothing more, nothing less." Relief washed through her, so potent it was almost dizzying. And in its wake, something she thought was long dead began to stir. Ambition. For 2 years, she had focused only on survival. But this offer, this was a chance to live again. "If I accept," she said carefully, "what would be my first assignment?" A triumphant, genuinely warm smile transformed Jamal's face. "Due diligence on a potential acquisition in Dubai, a telecommunications company with some very interesting regulatory complications. When would you need an answer?" "Now," he said simply. "The Dubai deal is moving quickly. If you're going to be part of this company, you need to be all in." This was it. The moment that would determine whether she remained trapped in the shadows or took the leap back into the life she had lost. She looked at the man across from her, a man who saw her value when the rest of the world saw a disgraced waitress. "All right," she said, the words coming out stronger than she'd expected. "I accept." Less than 36 hours later, Lena found herself cocooned in a world she'd only ever read about. The first-class suite of the Emirates flight to Dubai was a symphony of cream leather, polished mahogany, and the whisper-quiet hum of engines slicing through the night sky. During her successful years in London, she had been too practical for such extravagances. Now, surrounded by luxury that felt both surreal and slightly overwhelming, she watched the pinpricks of light from the world below. Jamal sat across the aisle, a portrait of focused intensity, his laptop open as his fingers flew across the keyboard. He was a man who never stopped moving, never stopped building. Occasionally, he would glance her way, offering a brief, reassuring smile, but he was mostly absorbed in the relentless flow of his global empire. "Nervous about returning to Dubai?" she asked during one of his brief pauses. He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "Nervous? No," he said, though his expression grew distant. "But returning home always brings up memories I prefer to keep buried. Complicated ones. Dubai is where I learned that survival sometimes requires becoming someone you never intended to be." The vulnerability in his admission surprised her, forging a new, unspoken connection between them. It was a logic she understood intimately. "What about you?" he asked. "Any second thoughts about diving back into the deep end of international law?" "Dozens," she admitted with a wry smile. "But they're outnumbered by the desire to use my brain for something more complex than memorizing a wine list." She laughed softly. "You have no idea how many times I wanted to correct customers who mispronounced Chateau Margaux." His laugh was warm and genuine. "You're not invisible anymore, Lena. Now you're conspicuous." He reached for a thick folder from his briefcase and passed it to her. "Which brings us to your first assignment." Her name was on the files label, Project Curry Telecom. Founded 15 years ago by Omar Curry. On paper, it's a perfect acquisition to expand our Middle Eastern operations. But underneath the surface there are problems. Regulatory complications that don't make sense. Licensing disputes, government contract challenges, personnel issues that seem almost surgically designed to devalue the company right before we make our offer. Lena felt her analytical mind engage, the familiar thrill of a puzzle beginning to override her nervousness. "You think it's orchestrated?" "I think Omar Curry," Jamal said, his eyes dark with suspicion, "is either the unluckiest businessman in the Emirates, or someone is deliberately sabotaging his company to force a lowball sale. I want you to dig deeper than our Dubai legal team has been able to. Sometimes, an outsider's perspective reveals things the local experts have been trained to overlook." The Dubai International Airport was a monument to ambition, a bustling hub of global connectivity that pulsed with energy even at midnight. As their private car navigated the pristine highways toward the city center, Lena stared out the window, mesmerized. Gleaming skyscrapers rose from the desert like shards of crystal, each one a testament to a relentless drive to build the impossible. The hotel, the iconic sail-shaped Burj Al Arab, appeared before them like something from a dream, its form illuminated against the dark Persian Gulf. "We'll be staying in the royal suite," Jamal mentioned casually as they entered a lobby of breathtaking opulence. "It has separate bedrooms and a full office setup for our work." The clarification was unnecessary but appreciated, a quiet acknowledgement of the professional boundaries she had fought to establish. Their suite was magnificent, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Gulf, but Jamal led her directly to a separate room equipped with computers, printers, and a conference table overlooking the water. "Everything you need should be here," he said. "The meeting with Omar Khoury is at 10 tomorrow morning. That gives you the night to review these files and form your initial impressions." As Jamal retired to his room, leaving her alone with the city lights sparkling below, Lena felt a surge of adrenaline. She was no longer nervous. She was energized, focused, and more alive than she had been in years. This was the work she was born to do. She poured a coffee and opened the first thick binder, the satisfaction of using her skills to solve meaningful problems washing over her. 4 hours, she was lost in a world of financial projections, regulatory statutes, and contractual obligations, piecing together the puzzle of Khoury Telecom's misfortunes. But as she opened a file detailing the company's international partnerships, a name on the letterhead made her blood freeze. It was printed in elegant, familiar typography, a ghost from a past she thought she had buried. Listed as the company's London legal counsel was a firm she knew all too well, Sterling and Associates, the firm that had destroyed her career, the firm run by the father of the man who had betrayed her, the same firm whose partners had threatened to ruin her life if she ever dared to practice law again. And now, somehow, they were connected to Jamal's most important acquisition. The coincidence, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest, seemed utterly impossible. Which meant it wasn't a coincidence at all. Morning in Dubai arrived with a brilliant, silent authority, but Lena had been awake for hours, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. Jamal found her at 7 a.m. in the office, still dressed in the clothes she'd worn the previous evening, surrounded by documents that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I couldn't," she replied, her eyes bright with intensity as she gestured to the papers spread before her like a battle map. "Jamal, this isn't just corporate sabotage. It's something much more complex and much more personal." She pushed a contract across the table. "Sterling and Associates. All of their recent legal work has been designed to create problems, not solve them." The offices of Khoury Telecom occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Dubai's financial district. Omar Khoury met them in a conference room that blended traditional Middle Eastern hospitality with cutting-edge technology. He was younger than Lena had expected, perhaps 50, with intelligent eyes that weighed every word. But what struck her most was the profound exhaustion that seemed to radiate from him, the weariness of a man fighting a battle he didn't fully understand. "Mr. Al-Sayed," he began, "thank you for considering our company." "Business is business, Omar," Jamal said, his tone professionally cordial but with an undercurrent of alertness. "I've brought Miss Lena to review the legal complications that seem to be affecting your operations." Omar's attention shifted to Lena with polite interest. She opened her briefcase with deliberate care. "Mr. Khoury, I've been reviewing your recent legal documentation, and I've identified a pattern." She laid out her findings with chilling precision. "Your London legal counsel has been creating obstacles, not removing them. Contract modifications that invite regulatory scrutiny, licensing applications that contain deliberate errors, partnership agreements structured to fail." Omar Khoury's face went pale. That's exactly what I've been suspecting, but I couldn't prove it. Why would your own lawyers sabotage your business?" Jamal asked, though Lena could see he already suspected the answer. "Because they're not really my lawyers," Omar said, his voice dropping. 3 years ago, my daughter, Yasmin, was studying at Oxford. She became engaged to a young man from a prominent London legal family. The engagement ended badly, with threats. And suddenly, this prestigious firm was offering their services at rates I couldn't refuse. Sterling and Associates, Lena stated, her voice quiet but firm. Omar's surprise was genuine. You know them. Unfortunately, she said. And the man your daughter was engaged to. His name was Oliver Thorne. The conference room fell silent. Omar stared at Lena with dawning, horrified understanding, while Jamal's expression grew dangerously cold as he realized the true, venomous nature of the conspiracy they had just uncovered. Yes, Omar confirmed, his voice heavy with regret. That was his name. When my Yasmin discovered he was simply using her to gain access to our family's business connections, she broke the engagement. He did not take it well. He threatened to ruin us both. And he's been systematically doing exactly that, Lena confirmed, her voice ringing with the clarity of someone seeing a hidden enemy brought into the light. Using his legal expertise to create problems that would force you into a desperate sale, most likely to a shell corporation controlled by his associates. In that moment, the nature of the meeting changed. This was no longer a due diligence review. It was the formation of an alliance. The mission wasn't simply about an acquisition anymore. It was about justice. Lena spent the next hour laying out a strategy, requesting access to all of Omar's legal files and communication records with Sterling and Associates. The counterattack came at midnight, shattering the focused quiet of their hotel suite where Lena had been working for 18 straight hours. The call came on Jamal's private line. He answered on the second ring, his voice immediately alert. Lena watched his expression shift from professional focus to a mask of cold fury as he listened to the voice on the other end. When he finally hung up, the silence in the room felt ominous. That was my head of security in New York, he said, his voice dangerously low. Someone broke into my office tonight. Nothing was stolen, but every digital and physical file related to the Curry acquisition was accessed and copied. The implications hit Lena like ice water. They know, she whispered. They know we're onto them. It gets worse, Jamal continued, his dark eyes fixed on her. My partner, Kenji, received a call an hour ago from someone claiming to represent your former employers in London. They're threatening legal action against you for practicing international law without a license. The threat was a poisoned dart, aimed directly at the heart of her past trauma. Fear and anger warred in her chest, but for the first time in 2 years, anger won. A fire she thought had been extinguished roared back to life. Let them threaten, she said, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. We have evidence of systematic fraud. A few intimidation tactics aren't going to stop us now. Lena, these people destroyed your career once, Jamal said, taking a step toward her, his concern for her safety overriding everything else. Yes, she said, standing to meet his gaze, her posture radiating a strength she hadn't felt in years. They did. But this time I'm not alone. The threats, meant to make them retreat, had the opposite effect. They solidified their resolve. The next morning brought an unexpected and powerful new ally. Omar's daughter, Yasmin Curry, arrived from London. She was beautiful, intelligent, and radiated the quiet fury of a woman betrayed. And she didn't come with just accusations. She came with a war chest. For 3 years, she had meticulously saved every piece of evidence. Personal emails, recorded phone conversations where Oliver bragged about his scheme, and financial records that connected him to a network of shell corporations. The final devastating piece was a database he had built, listing dozens of successful Middle Eastern entrepreneurs, a list of future targets. With this undeniable proof, the battle was swift and decisive. Working with regulatory authorities in both London and Dubai, they launched a coordinated legal assault. Within 72 hours, the Dubai Financial Services Authority had frozen all assets connected to Sterling and Associates' Middle Eastern operations, and London's Serious Fraud Office announced a formal investigation into Oliver Thorne and his father. The empire built on deceit began to crumble. 3 months later, the business sections of newspapers across 2 continents carried headlines about the international fraud operation. But for Lena, the most meaningful victory was a small announcement in the New York Legal Journal. She had been fully reinstated to practice law and was officially named as senior legal counsel for Al Sayed Global Enterprises. Any regrets? Jamal asked. They were standing in their new shared office on the 53rd floor of his building, the entirety of Manhattan sparkling below them. About exposing an international conspiracy and getting justice for everyone Oliver Thorne tried to destroy? Lena smiled, turning from the window to face him. None whatsoever. I wasn't talking about the case, he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He stepped closer, his gaze intense and sincere. Lena, watching you these past few months, watching you reclaim your life and fight with such brilliance and passion, it's made me realize something. He paused, his heart in his eyes. I'm falling in love with you. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. You saw me when I was trying my best to be invisible, she whispered. I think I started falling in love with you then. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and launching into a grand adventure all at once. The quiet waitress who was an exiled lawyer and the ruthless billionaire who was a lonely boy from Riyadh had found in each other a missing piece. They were no longer just partners in business, they were partners in life. And as the city lights promised an endless future, they began planning not just their next acquisition, but the empire they would build together, founded on justice, integrity, and a love that had saved them both.